Tsar Bomba, the bomb that was too powerful for Earth. On October 30th, 1961, the Soviet Union detonated a weapon so powerful that the shockwave circled the entire planet 3 times. Its fireball was visible from over 600 miles away. Windows shattered in Norway and Finland, countries that weren't even part of the test. The flash was so bright that pilots flying the delivery plane, already 50 kilometers from the blast, feared for their lives, even wearing specially designed goggles. This wasn't the end of the world. But for 8 terrifying minutes, it might as well have been. This is the story of Tsar Bomba, the most powerful weapon humanity has ever built. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something most people never think about. This bomb was never meant to be used. It was meant to send a message. And that message still echoes today. Before we start, quick question for you. If you had to guess, how many times more powerful do you think Tsar Bomba was compared to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima? Drop your guess in the comments before you keep watching. I promise you, the real number is going to surprise you. Let's get into it. Part 1, The World in 1961. To understand why Tsar Bomba exists, you have to understand the world that built it. By 1961, the Cold War wasn't just tense, it was spiraling. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in a competition that touched everything: space, science, ideology, and above all, weapons. Nuclear weapons specifically had become the ultimate currency of power. Whoever had the biggest, scariest bomb had the loudest voice on the world stage. Just a year earlier, the U-2 spy plane incident had humiliated the Soviets when an American pilot was shot down deep inside Soviet territory. The Berlin crisis was heating up, and within months the Berlin Wall would begin construction. Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, needed something enormous, not just a weapon, but a statement. A demonstration so overwhelming that no one on Earth could question Soviet power again. So here's a question worth sitting with. When a country builds a weapon not to use it, but purely to prove a point, is that actually safer than building a weapon meant for war? Or is it just as dangerous, because the world still has to live with it? Khrushchev turned to his scientists and effectively said, "Build me the biggest bomb ever created. Not for war. For fear." And they did. Part 2, The Scientists Behind the Monster. The design and construction of Tsar Bomba was overseen by a team of Soviet physicists working at Artemis-16, a closed, secret city that didn't officially exist on Soviet maps. Among them was Andrei Sakharov, one of the most brilliant and complicated figures in nuclear history. Sakharov was a genius. He was also, later in life, one of the Soviet Union's most outspoken critics of nuclear weapons, eventually winning the Nobel Peace Prize for his human rights activism. But in 1961, he was still deeply embedded in a machine that built the most destructive object in human history. Imagine being the mind behind something so powerful that you spend the rest of your life trying to warn the world about it. That's Sakharov's story in a single sentence. The original design for the bomb called for a yield of 100 megatons of TNT equivalent. To put that in perspective, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, little boy, had a yield of about 15 kilotons. That means the original Tsar Bomba design was roughly 6,600 times more powerful than the bomb that devastated an entire city in seconds. But even the Soviets got nervous about their own creation. Scientists calculated that a 100 megaton detonation would produce so much nuclear fallout that it could endanger the very bomber crew delivering it, and possibly cause unacceptable radioactive contamination across Soviet territory itself. So they made a critical modification. They replaced the uranium tamper in the final stage of the bomb with one made of lead. This single design change cut the yield roughly in half, but it also reduced the resulting nuclear fallout by an estimated 97%. It was, strangely, a moment of restraint inside an act of unimaginable excess. Quick question for you watching this: Does knowing that scientists deliberately reduced the bomb's power to limit fallout change how you feel about the test? Does it make it feel more responsible, or does it just remind you how much destructive power they were willing to unleash even after cutting it in half? Even scaled down, the final device would still be the most powerful weapon ever built, by a massive margin. Part 3. How do you even build something like this? Tsar Bomba was a 3-stage thermonuclear weapon, meaning it used a fission reaction to trigger a fusion reaction, which then triggered yet another reaction. This is often called a staged hydrogen bomb, and it's fundamentally different from the atomic bombs used in World War II. Atomic bombs like the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki relied purely on nuclear fission, splitting atoms apart. Thermonuclear weapons like Tsar Bomba use fission as merely the spark plug for a much larger and more violent process, fusion, the same reaction that powers the sun. The bomb itself was almost comically massive. It weighed around 27 metric tons, about 60,000 pounds, and measured roughly 8 meters long, or about 26 feet. It was so large that engineers had to modify a Tupolev Tu-95 bomber specifically to carry it, stripping out the bomb bay doors and part of the fuselage just to make room. Here's a question worth pausing on. This bomb was too big for a plane built specifically to carry nuclear weapons. What does it tell you about the mindset of the people building it, that too big to fit wasn't a reason to stop, it was just an engineering problem to solve? The modified aircraft, along with an observation plane trailing behind it to record and measure the blast, took off on the morning of October 30th, 1961, heading toward a remote test site above the Arctic Circle. Part 4, Novaya Zemlya, Ground Zero. The detonation site was Novaya Zemlya, a remote Arctic archipelago in northern Russia. It's a place so isolated, so far removed from ordinary human life, that it had become the Soviet Union's primary site for nuclear testing throughout the Cold War. The bomb was dropped from an altitude of about 10,500 meters, roughly 34,000 feet, attached to a massive parachute system designed to slow its fall. This gave the bomber and its escort plane precious extra time to fly clear of the blast radius before detonation. Even with the parachute, and even flying at full speed away from the drop point, the crew had only about 188 seconds, just over 3 minutes, to get to a safe distance before the bomb detonated at an altitude of approximately 4,000 meters above the ground. Picture that for a second. You've just released the most powerful weapon ever created from your aircraft. You have 3 minutes. Every second matters. And you don't actually know, with total certainty, whether safe distance is actually safe. If you were the pilot of that aircraft, knowing there was real uncertainty about whether you'd survive the blast, would you have taken that mission? Let me know honestly in the comments, because I think most of us like to imagine we'd be brave. But this was real, calculated risk, not a movie. At 11:32 a.m. Moscow time, Tsar Bomba detonated. Part 5, the moment of detonation. What happened next is almost beyond human comprehension. The resulting fireball reached nearly 8 kilometers in diameter, roughly 5 miles wide, and touched the ground despite the bomb detonating thousands of meters in the air. The flash of light was so intense it was visible from over 1,000 kilometers away, roughly 620 miles. The mushroom cloud that formed climbed to a height of about 64 kilometers, over 40 miles into the sky. To put that into perspective, that's more than 7 times the cruising altitude of a commercial airplane. The cloud eventually reached a diameter of roughly 95 kilometers, about 59 miles wide, effectively becoming visible in satellite imagery. The shockwave from the blast was so powerful it was detected circling the Earth 3 times. Seismologists as far away as New Zealand recorded the disturbance. On the ground below, even though the area was largely uninhabited for exactly this reason, the effects were staggering. Wooden houses in a village more than 50 kilometers away were reportedly destroyed. Buildings hundreds of kilometers from the blast site sustained damage. Windows shattered in Norway and Finland, more than 900 kilometers away. The heat from the blast was intense enough to cause third-degree burns on exposed skin at a distance of 100 kilometers, over 62 miles, from ground zero. Here's a genuinely important question to think about. This test was deliberately designed to minimize casualties, conducted in one of the most remote places on Earth, and its effects were still detected on a different continent. What does that tell you about the actual difference between a test and the use of a weapon like this? The escort observation plane, despite being roughly 45 kilometers away when the bomb detonated, reportedly dropped several hundred meters in altitude briefly due to the force of the shockwave hitting it. The delivery bomber itself, having flown as far as it could in the time available, still experienced the shockwave, though thanks to the parachute delay system, the crew survived. Part 6. The numbers that are hard to process. Let's talk raw numbers, because they matter here. Tsar Bomba's yield is generally estimated at approximately 50 megatons of TNT equivalent. Some estimates place it slightly higher, around 57 to 58 megatons. To understand what that means, 50 megatons is roughly 3,333 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It's also more powerful than all the conventional explosives used by every nation combined during the entirety of World War II, including every bomb dropped in every theater of that war, multiplied several times over. It remains, to this day, the most powerful explosive device ever detonated by human beings. Not just the most powerful nuclear weapon, the most powerful explosion of any kind, deliberately created, in recorded history. Quick pause, take a second and really try to visualize that number. 3,333 Hiroshimas. In one single detonation. Does your brain actually process that, or does it just become an abstract statistic? Because I think that's part of why this story matters. The numbers are so large they stop feeling real, and that's dangerous in its own way. Part 7. Why build something you'd never use? This is the part of the story that I think gets overlooked the most, and it's honestly the most important part. Tsar Bomba was never designed to be a practical weapon. Its size made it impossible to deliver via intercontinental ballistic missile, the primary delivery method for nuclear weapons by that point in the arms race. It could only be dropped from a specially modified bomber, flying into heavily defended airspace, giving enemy forces plenty of warning and opportunity to intercept it. In other words, as an actual weapon of war, Tsar Bomba was almost useless. So why build it? The answer is something military historians call weaponized fear. Tsar Bomba wasn't built to be dropped on a city. It was built to be detonated once, filmed, measured, and broadcast to the world as proof of Soviet scientific and military capability. It was psychological warfare on a civilizational scale, a message to the United States and to the entire world that said, we can build something this powerful, and we're willing to prove it. In many ways, it worked exactly as intended. Western scientists and military officials were stunned by the test results. It reshaped how both superpowers thought about the upper limits of nuclear weapon design, and, in an ironic twist, it also helped push both sides toward eventually recognizing that weapons this large had essentially no practical military value. Here's a question I want you to really think about. If the most powerful weapon ever built was made purely to send a message rather than to be used, does that make Tsar Bomba more dangerous, or less? Is a weapon built for fear better or worse than a weapon built for war? I don't think there's a clean answer. But I think it's a question worth sitting with. Part 8. The human cost and the human conscience. We tend to talk about weapons like this in terms of numbers, megatons, kilometers, seconds. But there were real people connected to this story, and their stories matter too. Andrei Sakharov, the physicist most associated with the bomb's design, reportedly grew increasingly uneasy with the scale of what he had helped create. In the years following the test, he became an outspoken critic of nuclear proliferation and atmospheric testing. eventually playing a role in pushing for the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, a landmark agreement that banned nuclear testing in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. He would go on to become one of the most prominent human rights activists in Soviet history, ultimately winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975. A stunning transformation for a man who once helped build the most destructive weapon in human history. There's something deeply human in that arc, a brilliant mind pulled into a system built on fear and competition, who later spent decades trying to undo the damage of what that same system asked him to create. So here's a question for you. Do you think it's possible to redeem involvement in something this destructive? Can building a weapon like Tsar Bomba ever be balanced out by a lifetime spent fighting against nuclear proliferation afterward? Or is that kind of involvement something that can't really be walked back? I'd genuinely like to know what you think. This isn't a rhetorical question. Drop your honest opinion below. Part 9. The Aftermath and the Arms Race. Tsar Bomba didn't end the arms race. If anything, in the immediate aftermath, it intensified fears on both sides of the Cold War. The United States accelerated its own weapons research, though it never pursued a device on the same physical scale. American strategists had already begun favoring smaller, more accurate, more deliverable warheads over sheer explosive size. This turned out to be the more strategically sound approach. As missile guidance technology improved throughout the 1960s and beyond, the need for enormous single-bomb yields diminished. A smaller, more accurate weapon delivered precisely to a target could achieve more destructive effect per unit of size than a massive, imprecise bomb ever could. In many ways, Tsar Bomba represents the peak, and simultaneously the beginning of the end, of the bigger is better era of nuclear weapon design. After 1961, the trend in nuclear weapons development shifted decisively toward precision, miniaturization, and multiple independently targetable warheads rather than singular massive devices. Here's something worth considering. Humanity built the most powerful weapon it has ever created, tested it once, and then largely moved away from that approach entirely. What does it say about Tsar Bomba that even the country that built it seemed to conclude, almost immediately, that this wasn't actually the right direction to keep pursuing? The Partial Test Ban Treaty, signed just 2 years later in 1963 by the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom, formally ended atmospheric nuclear testing between the major powers. Tsar Bomba, in a strange way, may have helped accelerate the very treaty that ensured nothing like it would ever be tested in the atmosphere again. Part 10. Could something like this happen again? This is probably the question most people watching this video actually want answered. So let's address it directly. Technically, yes, modern nuclear powers likely possess the scientific and engineering capability to build a device even larger than Tsar Bomba, if they chose to. The physics involved in staged thermonuclear weapons hasn't disappeared. If anything, our understanding of it has only deepened since 1961. But practically speaking, no nation has pursued this path since. The strategic logic of the modern nuclear era favors precision, deliverability, and multiple smaller warheads over single enormous devices. Additionally, international treaties, including the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, though not universally ratified, have created strong global norms against large-scale nuclear testing of any kind. So Tsar Bomba likely remains, and will likely continue to remain, the largest explosive device ever detonated by human beings, not because we lost the ability to build something bigger, but because the world collectively decided, whether explicitly or implicitly, that it didn't need to. Last question for you, and I think it might be the most important one in this entire video. Knowing that humanity built this, tested it once, and then chose never to do it again, does that make you more hopeful about how the world handles dangerous technology, or more worried about what we're still capable of if the right pressures line up again? Closing. Tsar Bomba was detonated for 8 minutes on a remote Arctic island in 1961. 60+ years later, we're still talking about it, Not because it was used in war, not because it killed millions of people, but because it represents something almost incomprehensible about human capability. The willingness to build something purely to prove that we could. It's a story about physics, yes. But it's really a story about fear, ego, restraint, and the strange moments in history when humanity stares directly at its own destructive potential and has to decide what to do next. If you found this video interesting, let me know in the comments which Cold War story you want covered next, because there are dozens of moments just like this one, hiding in the shadow of the headlines you already know. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.